the 4,418-year history of the galactic Concorde, exactly one Tier 9 reassessment was ever conducted in person. The surveyor who conducted it did not return, neither did the Concorde. Not the Kari Schism Wars, not the Vorthan Uprising, not any of the conflicts our archivists turned into cautionary parables for hatchlings. The species that ended us was not on any threat registry. They were listed at Tier 9, which meant pre-spaceflight, harmless, and harvestable. Their world was cataloged as KV7719, an unremarkable rock in the outer bracket. Their designation in Concorde trade tongue translated, roughly, to dirtball. The Surveyor Prime who boarded our vessel to confirm their reclassification carried a rank collar with 14 notches carved into the obsidian. One for every civilization he had personally downgraded. He wanted a 15th. He did not get it. The Concorde deployed an entire reassessment fleet to support his ceremony. 12 worlds offered tribute in advance of the harvest. 200 billion sentients waited to receive their share of the new territory, and within 96 standard hours, none of it mattered. So how did a species we had watched for 200 years, a species we were certain could not see us, a species whose entire planet we had mapped down to the individual livestock, and the oldest interstellar government in this arm of the galaxy? And how did one frontier survey vessel, which I was assigned to as punishment for filing too many honest reports, become the place where it all began? To understand that, you have to start with the tier system. Picture the galactic Concorde in the year 4408 of the standard calendar. 407 member worlds, 11,000 cataloged species, trade routes stretching across 6 spiral arms. The Concorde called itself the longest-running peaceful federation in recorded galactic history, and by certain metrics, that was true. The metric they did not advertise was how the peace was kept. The tier system was the engine. 12 ranks assigned by the Survey Bureau determined what a species was allowed to become. Tier 1 was full membership. Tier 2 was protected sovereignty. Tier 3 through Tier 6 were observed development with limited interference. Tier 7 and Tier 8 were quarantine cases, watched but not contacted. Tier 9 was the line. Below Tier 9, a species had no rights. Their worlds could be harvested for resources. Their populations could be relocated, suppressed, or in the old language the Bureau no longer used in public called. The Concorde called this stewardship. The species being stewarded rarely had a word for it because they were never told it was happening. The tier system was the Concorde's greatest achievement. It was also our single point of failure. The system assumed 3 things. It assumed our surveyors were never wrong. It assumed a species could not know its tier without being told. And it assumed that no civilization, once classified, would ever lie to us. KV7719 was about to break all 3. The species we called the dirtball natives, in which they called by a name we never learned correctly, were marked Tier 9 in the year 4221. They had agriculture, basic metallurgy, and what our analysts described as promising but unfocused tool use. They had no orbital infrastructure, no detectable energy signatures above a primitive baseline, no signs of organized planetary government. The classification was confirmed in 4060, reconfirmed in 4330. And scheduled for harvest review in 4,418. 200 years of observation, 11,000 survey passes, 43,000 pages of behavioral data. All of it consistent, all of it stable, all of it we would learn later performed. But that hunting ground belonged to us. We were the predator, we were certain. The narrator of this account was not certain of anything. He was a junior cataloger who had been assigned to the wrong ship for the wrong reasons, and he was about to watch the universe rearrange itself in front of him. My name is Velk. In the Concorde registry, I'm listed as Junior Cataloger 3rd Class, Survey Bureau Outer Bracket Division, attached to the assessment vessel Patient Measure. I am of the Velk lineage, which is a small insectoid clade from the trade world, Isin Prime. My people are good at filing things, we are good at counting things, we are not good at anything else, which is why most of us end up in administration. I never wanted frontier duty. I had spent 11 years in the Central Archives, sorting reassessment petitions and cross-referencing tier appeals. It was quiet work. It suited me. Then in the year 4416, I made the mistake of filing a report that pointed out a small statistical inconsistency in the tier confirmation data for a system called Brevant 4. The inconsistency was minor. The crop yield estimates from the orbital surveys did not match the population estimates from the ground track survey. Either the natives were growing too much food or there were more of them than we thought, or both. I noted it, attached it to a routine quarterly filing, and forgot about it. 6 weeks later, I received my reassignment orders. Outer bracket, Frontier Survey Vessel, indefinite posting. I understood immediately. I had asked a question that no one was supposed to ask. The Bureau did not punish you for being wrong. The Bureau punished you for being curious. The patient measure was an old vessel, the kind of ship that had been built for prestige 2 centuries ago and downgraded to scut work every decade since. Her crew was 42 sentients drawn from 9 species, all of us assigned for similar reasons. We did the routine reassessment work for the outer bracket. We confirmed Tier 9s. We filed our reports. We did not ask questions. For 2 years, I did exactly that. I learned to file in silence. I learned to nod when senior catalogers spoke. I learned to keep my mandibles shut when I noticed things I was not supposed to notice. And then, in the third week of the 8th month of the year 4418, a Concorde priority signal arrived at our station. Surveyor Prime Oscar Adi Threll was coming aboard. The senior staff went pale. The junior staff, including me, did not understand what the senior staff already knew. A Surveyor Prime did not visit frontier vessels. A Surveyor Prime did not conduct in-person reassessments. A Surveyor Prime stayed in the central worlds, where the political work happened, where the cameras were. For a Surveyor Prime to come to the outer bracket meant only one thing. Something on a tier confirmation report had attracted his attention, and he was going to fix it personally in a way that would be visible to the entire Concorde. He boarded our vessel 3 days later. He wore the polished obsidian rank collar of his office, 14 notches glinting under the corridor lights. He brought no entourage. He brought no escort. He explained with the easy confidence of a sentient who had never been told he could not have something that he intended to conduct a personal reassessment of KV 7719. He believed the natives were ready for downgrade to Tier 10. Tier 10 meant harvest authorization. He said it the way another sentient might announce a meal order. The man who first noticed what was wrong with the KV 7719 data was not me. He was my mentor, senior cataloger Ren Velkos. Ren was older than me by 60 years. He had been with the Survey Bureau for most of his life, and he had survived the politics of it the way a stone survives a river. By being too dense to move, he had a long face, 4 eyes set in a vertical line, and the dry, patient manner of a sentient who had read too many reports to be surprised by anything. He should have been surprised by what he found in the KV-77. The Surveyor Prime had ordered a full data review before his ceremony. Ren was assigned to lead it. He spent 4 days in the archive cabin, going through 2 centuries of survey passes, cross-referencing observational reports against demographic estimates, and at the end of those 4 days, he came to my workstation and put a single data sliver on my desk. Vilk, he said, "Tell me what you see." I plugged the sliver into my terminal. The screen filled with a scatter plot of human population estimates against detected energy signatures. Going back 200 years, the population grew. The energy signatures did not. They have not industrialized. I said, "That is what the file says." Ren answered, "That is what the file shows." "That is what the file shows," he agreed. "Now look at this." He pulled up a second graph. It was a plot of detected radio emissions from KV-719, also going back 200 years. The emissions were almost flat, a tiny baseline of agricultural and meteorological chatter, exactly the kind of signal you would expect from a species at late Tier 9, nothing else. "This is consistent," I said. "It is too consistent." Ren said, "Look at the noise floor. Look at the natural variation." I looked. The noise floor of a Tier 9 planet should fluctuate with weather patterns, solar activity, and the random emergence of local technologies. The KV-7719 noise floor was almost mathematically flat. The variation was lower than the variation we measured on uninhabited moons. "It looks suppressed," I said, before I could stop myself. Ren nodded once. "It looks suppressed." He took the sliver back. He did not say what he was going to do with it. I knew in the way a junior knows a senior that he was going to take it to the Surveyor Prime. He was going to do what catalogers in our lineage were trained to do. He was going to file an honest report. I tried to talk him out of it. I did not try very hard. Ren was not a sentient who could be talked out of things. 3 hours later, the Surveyor Prime had Ren executed in the assessment bay. The official cause was logged as data contamination. Second instance, capital. There was no trial. There did not need to be one. A Surveyor Prime's word was sufficient. I inherited Ren's terminal. I inherited his archive cabin. I inherited his notes. I did not file a report. I want to tell you that I did something brave after Ren died. I did not. I sat in his cabin and I read his notes and I tried to keep my mandibles from shaking. And I did the only thing a junior cataloger of my lineage knew how to do. I kept working. But Ren had left more than notes. He had left a method. In the bottom drawer of his terminal cabinet, sealed under a routine archive label, was a personal file. It contained 200 years of cross-references that no one had ever assembled in one place. Crop yield discrepancies, population growth curves, radio emission flatlines, geological surveys that did not match what the natives appeared to be doing on the surface. A small, almost throwaway note about a structure the orbital surveys had cataloged as primitive agricultural silo, designation 44B, which Rand had circled 3 times in red ink. He had written in the margin in his careful hand, "The geometry is wrong." I pulled the file on silo 44B. The orbital scans showed a cylindrical concrete structure approximately 40 meters tall, used according to our analysis for grain storage. It had been built in the year 4,389, 29 years before the Surveyor Prime's arrival. It was unremarkable. I ran a geometric analysis. The walls were thicker than grain storage required. The foundation extended deeper into the bedrock than any silo on the planet. The interior volume, according to the radar passes, was smaller than the exterior dimensions suggested. The difference was almost 3,000 cubic meters of unaccounted space. I checked the other silos on the planet. There were 612 of them, scattered across the inhabited continent. 44 of them had been built in the same construction period. 44 of them had the same geometric anomaly. 3,000 cubic meters times 44 was 132,000 cubic meters of hidden interior space, spread across a planet we had classified as harmless. I did not file a report. I was not Wren. But I began to look at the rest of the data with different eyes. The crop yields, they were too high for the populations we had estimated. Either the natives were growing far more food than they needed, or there were far more of them than we thought, or both. The radio emissions, they were too flat. A species at late Tier 9 should be experimenting with primitive broadcasting. The KV7719 natives had stopped, almost as if someone had told them to stop. The population movements, the natives shifted between settlements in patterns our analysts had labeled seasonal migration. When I overlaid those patterns against the construction dates of the anomalous silos, they were not seasonal. They were rotational. Different groups occupying different sites in a rotation that took, by my calculation, almost exactly 40 years to complete. 40 years. The same 40 years during which the radio emissions had gone flat and the silos with the wrong geometry had been built. I leaned back from the terminal. My carapace felt cold. They had seen us. I did not know when I did not know how. But somewhere around the year 4378, the natives of KV7719 had figured out they were being watched, and instead of waving, instead of broadcasting, instead of doing anything we would have expected, they had done the one thing the tier system was incapable of detecting. They had performed for 40 years. They had lived to play for our cameras. They had kept their technology hidden. They had kept their population suppressed in our records. They had built whatever was inside those silos in the spaces between our orbital passes, and they had calibrated every signal we received from their planet to match the profile of a harmless, harvestable Tier 9 civilization. They had done it on purpose. They had done it patiently. They had done it without a single mistake, and the Surveyor Prime was about to land in person to confirm it. The reassessment ceremony was scheduled for the 42nd day of our orbit. By the 39th day, patient measure had moved into low planetary orbit, and Surveyor Prime Threll had begun his ceremonial preparations. I watched him in the assessment bay each morning, polishing the obsidian rank collar. He did it himself. He did not trust the ritual to subordinates. Each notch on the collar represented a civilization he had personally classified downward. He told me once, without looking at me, that the 15th notch would be for the KV7719 natives, and that the obsidian was already cut and waiting in his private cabin. He spoke to me only because I was the cataloger assigned to record the ceremony for the archive. He did not consider me a sentient with opinions. He considered me a recording device with mandibles. That was useful. I watched him. I listened. I noticed things. He could not stop touching his data tablet. He carried it everywhere. A thin silver rectangle that displayed the Bureau's master tier registry. He kept opening the file on KV7719, kept scrolling through the 2 centuries of survey data, kept tapping the small green icon that marked the native's current classification. He was rehearsing the moment when that icon would turn red. On the morning of the 40th day, the tablet glitched. Threll was reviewing the ceremonial protocol when the display flickered, blanked, and rebooted. He swore in his native tongue, struck the side of the tablet, and brought it back to life. He logged the incident as a minor systems error and continued. On the morning of the 41st day, the tablet glitched twice. He logged both incidents. He requested a diagnostic from the ship's engineer. The engineer reported no faults. On the morning of the 42nd day, the day of the ceremony, The tablet would not initialize at all. Threll spent 20 minutes trying to bring it online. The ship's engineer was summoned. The ship's signals officer was summoned. The tablet remained dark. Threll, in a rare moment of visible frustration, removed his rank collar to use its internal display instead. The collar's display worked. He brought up the KV-70719 file on it. He proceeded with the ceremony. I was the only sentient on the patient measure who understood at that moment what had just happened. The tablet was a Concorde device. It used Concorde frequencies. It connected to Concorde networks. It should not have been possible for anything on a Tier 9 planet to interfere with it. The tablet had not failed. It had been turned off by something on the planet below. We descended in the assessment shuttle at noon, planetary local. The shuttle carried Threll, 6 honor guard officers from his cast, the ship's communications officer, 2 security analysts, and me. The ceremony was scheduled for a meadow outside one of the natives' larger settlements, a place our maps labeled as Agricultural Community Designation Mid-Continent 7B. The meadow was full of natives, 2,000 of them by my count, standing in loose rows. They wore simple woven garments. They held no weapons. They moved with the slow, deferential pace of a Tier 9 population receiving a Tier 1 visitor. They had been briefed. Our intelligence said on the protocols of receiving an off-world delegation. They had not been briefed. They had rehearsed. I understood it the moment I stepped off the shuttle. The natives were positioned too precise. Their spacing was identical, almost to the millimeter. The angles at which they bowed their heads were uniform across the entire meadow. Their breathing, if I extended my auditory cilia, was synchronized. This was not a primitive welcome. This was a parade ground. Threll did not notice. Threll saw only what he expected to see. A subordinate species, kneeling in deference, about to be downgraded for harvest. He walked to the center of the meadow with the slow, deliberate steps of a ceremonial procession. The honor guard formed a circle around him. The communications officer began to transmit the ceremony back to the patient measure. The security analysts scanned for threats and reported none. A single native walked out of the rows to meet him. She was small by human standards, which meant she was very small by ours. She wore a dark woolen coat, the kind their species used for cool weather, and she carried a metal cylinder in one hand. Our records would later identify the cylinder as a thermos, a primitive vessel used for storing heated beverages. She stopped 3 meters from Threll. She did not bow. She did not kneel. She did not display any of the deferential markers we had spent 2 centuries cataloging. She spoke, and she spoke in Concorde trade tongue. The accent was perfect. Surveyor Prime Oscati Threll, she said, 14 notches. We have been waiting for you. The honor guard reached for their weapons. Threll raised a hand to stop them. He was smiling in the slight, cold way his caste smiled at things they intended to enjoy. You speak our language, he said. Interesting. We have been listening to your language for 196 years. The woman said, your survey vessels broadcast on unsecured channels until the year 4331. After that, we had to work harder, but we managed. The smile on Threll's face did not change. I do not think he had processed her words yet. I do not think he was capable of it. You have prepared a presentation, he said. We have prepared a great deal. The woman said, she raised the thermos. She did not open it. She simply raised it, the way one might raise a glass. Behind her, in every direction across the meadow, the 2,000 natives raised their right hands in unison. Each of them held a small object I did not recognize. The objects looked like polished stones or perhaps pieces of pottery. They were not. I would learn later that they were transceivers, hand-built over the previous 12 years, calibrated to the exact frequency of the Concorde rank collar. The signal they sent did not damage the collar. It did something more elegant. It locked it. Threll reached up by reflex to broadcast a distress call. His fingers found the collar. The collar did not respond. He tapped harder. He tapped the emergency channel. He tapped the override sequence that only a Surveyor Prime knew. None of it worked. The collar that had carried 14 civilizations into harvest was in that meadow, a piece of polished obsidian. The woman in the wool coat watched him with an expression I have spent the rest of my life trying to describe. It was not anger. It was not triumph. It was something closer to patience, finally being rewarded. Surveyor Prime, she said, we would like to discuss our reassessment. The honor guard tried to fight. They were professionals. They were equipped with Concorde-issue pulse weapons rated for personal defense against Tier 6 threats and below. Against a Tier 9 population, they should have been overwhelming. The honor guard did not have time to fire. 6 of the natives in the front rows raised their arms, and 6 small projectiles crossed the meadow in less than a second. The projectiles did not look like weapons, they looked like seed pods. They struck the honor guard at the seam between helmet and collar, and the honor guard fell, one after the other in the same coordinated rhythm with which the natives had been breathing. The communications officer attempted to transmit back to the patient measure. His transmitter did not function. The security analysts attempted to deploy their personal shields. The shields did not function. The shuttle behind us attempted to lift off on its automated emergency protocol. The shuttle did not function. Nothing. Concord issued functioned in that meadow. Nothing had functioned for hours. The natives had been jamming us selectively and patiently from the moment our shuttle entered atmosphere. I stood very still. I held my recording device at the angle the regulations required. I did not move. I did not speak. I was a recording device with mandibles, and I had no reason to believe the natives wanted to harm a recording device. The woman in the wool coat looked at me. She looked at me for what felt like a long time. Catalog year, she said, "Your mentor's report was correct." I did not know what to say. He filed it. She said, "We received copies of every report your bureau has ever filed about us. We have been reading them for 40 years. His was the only honest one." She turned back to Threll. The Surveyor Prime had finally understood, I think, what was happening. His face had gone the particular shade of pale that his cast skin took when their certainty failed. He opened his mouth to speak. He raised one hand, perhaps to issue an order, perhaps to plead. I will never know. The woman in the wool coat unscrewed the lid of her thermos. She did not throw it. She did not drink from it. She simply held it open in the air between them. Something inside the thermos made a small sound, a click, very quiet. And Surveyor Primos Cuddy Threll, 14 notches on his collar and a 15th, waiting in his cabin, fell forward into the grass without ever finishing his sentence. It was the smallest death I have ever witnessed. There was no speech, there was no struggle, there was a click and a fall, and the man who had reclassified 14 civilizations was simply not a man anymore. The woman screwed the lid back onto her thermos. She looked at me again. "Catalar Vielk," she said, "we have a message for the Concorde. We would like you to deliver it." I delivered the message. The Concorde received it. The message was short. It contained 3 sentences. The first sentence stated that the species of KV7719, who called themselves human, were not a Tier 9 civilization, had not been a Tier 9 civilization for at least 40 years, and considered the Concorde's tier system to be an act of war against every species ever classified under it. The second sentence stated that the humans had spent those 40 years contacting other species. The Concorde had listed as Tier 9, using methods the Concorde had never detected, and that 83 of those species had agreed to the same protocol of deliberate underperformance. The third sentence stated that the humans were prepared to demonstrate, world by world, what the Concorde surveyors had failed to notice. They invited the Concorde to send more surveyors. They specified that none would be returned. The Concorde did not believe the message. The Concorde sent more surveyors. The surveyors did not return. Within 2 galactic years, the tier system collapsed. 83 Tier 9 worlds revealed themselves in 83 different ways. Each of them adapted to their own conditions. Each of them coordinated through methods we still do not fully understand. The Concorde's military fleets, designed to suppress primitive uprisings, found themselves engaging civilizations that had been preparing for them for decades. Some of those civilizations had built warships in caves. Some had hollowed out asteroids. Some had simply waited, the way the humans had waited until the Concorde came close enough to be turned off. The Concorde as it existed in the year 4408 no longer exists. The species that comprised it have scattered into smaller federations, mutual defense pacts, and a few quiet trade routes that no longer use tier classifications for anything. The Survey Bureau was dissolved in the year 4422. The rank collars were melted down. The obsidian, I'm told, was returned to the worlds it had been mined from. I survived because the humans understood, in a way the Concorde never did, that a recording device with mandibles is not a threat. They allowed me to return to Eason Prime. They allowed me to keep my notes. They asked only that I file accurate reports for the rest of my life, and I have done so. I'm old now. My carapace is brittle. My terminal is older than I am. A battered model salvaged from the patient measure before she was decommissioned. I file my reports each week to an archive that no government maintains and a system no bureau audits. No one reads them. That is not the point. The point is that Ren Vilkos filed an honest report. The point is that the humans read it. The point is that 200 years of observation, 11,000 survey passes, and 43,000 pages of data were defeated by one cataloger who noticed an inconsistency in one species that decided to perform. I think about the woman in the wool coat often. I never learned her name. I never learned what was in the thermos. The humans did not explain those things, and I did not ask. I think about her standing in that meadow, holding a metal cylinder, waiting 196 years for a Surveyor Prime to walk into it. I think she was not angry. I think she had stopped being angry a long time before that day. She was patient. They were all patient. That was the thing the Concorde could not measure. We had instruments for energy signatures, for population densities, for radio emissions, for crop yields, for 10,000 variables we considered important. We had no instrument for patience. The humans knew that, so they used the one weapon we had handed them for free. They let us underestimate them. And when we walked into the meadow to collect our 15th notch, they were already there, holding thermoses, waiting for the click. If this is the kind of history that the official archives have already forgotten, hit subscribe. I document the stories the Concorde burned and the Federations buried, the records that